We're good to go.
All right, so it's 6:05 and I call the December 4th meeting of the Equity Board to order. Dale, could I have your assistance with roll call?
Absolutely. We have 3 excused absences for this evening. Tony Curry, Lorna Gilmore, and Shani Kapoor are all excused absences. We're still expecting a few other members to show up, but I will do a roll call really quickly. Ray Manahan.
Here.
Shay Fleming is not currently here. Varna Kadoka is not currently here. Preeti Modipan.
Here.
Karthik Kashinath.
Here.
Leslie Millender Irwin.
Here.
Kelly Munn.
Here.
And Kunal is also not quite here yet, but he is intending to be here as well. So we'll welcome them in as they arrive.
Thank you.
Here's one of the, there.
All right.
You're good. That the warmth of youth right there on display. Welcome in, Kunal. Okay, great.
Okay. Does he need to stay here?
Kunal Shrutastava, are you here today?
I am.
Amazing. Here.
Okay, and then I don't see anyone here and I don't see anyone. I don't think anyone is on Teams. Do we have public comments?
We do not have public comment for this evening, and we did not receive any emails since our last meeting directly to the Equity Board.
Righty. Okay, on to the approval of minutes. How about we take 2 minutes to review the minutes that are in our packets? And I will look for someone to make a motion to approve. We have a packet.
Yes.
Okay. Is Teams set up on the screen? Or it shows no taker on there anymore?
I removed Shay's note taker, but it is otherwise. When Shay joins, it'll show her up there. The view right now that I have just shows us.
Make a motion to approve.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right. Any comments, corrections, suggestions? I will note the one correction that I've seen is on the minutes of the September 4th meeting, and then it says November 16th. And I think it should be October 16th.
It should be. Thank you.
All right, anyone else?
Just a question. We'll get to look at the glossary. Is there a link or something to that?
You can look at the current version in last month's materials, but also part of the implementation recommended in the last meeting will mean that it will be available on the city website in Q1 of the upcoming year. So probably February. We want to make sure. I will share more about this in just a moment in the report, but yes.
All right, any other questions or suggestions for edits? I think with that, we can consider it approved. Okay. All right, so now we're on to the chair report. And so that's the opening question. And this is, I have asked Ray to pause his bomb cyclone story because the question I have for you all is share something about your bomb cyclone experience. Good, bad, whatever you want to share about it. Who would like to go first?
I guess I kind of realized like how bad like Sammamish and Issaquah drivers are at knowing how stop signs work. Nobody knew how to
Agreed.
at the 4-way stop signs and the lights are out. Nobody knew how to navigate that. So it's also like really funny just watching people like, trying to figure out when to go.
Funny and scary. Hey, Veronica. We're doing, we just started our icebreaker, which is share an experience about your bomb. We'll share something about your bomb cyclone experience.
That was a good observation though.
Yeah.
And also a good.
I'd like to go next.
Chair, so I live up on Cougar Mountain and my primary road to get up there was closed for 5 days and didn't have power for 7 days. So, patience is key with these situations. But I took a pause because we got our power back right before the Thanksgiving holiday and we were expecting guests. So that was very quick for that. It was down. Our big event wasn't altered in any way, but patience and grateful for the city workers who spent days and hours trying to get us back up. They really worked hard. Yes.
Okay, who's next?
I can go. This is somewhat grim, but a big 150-foot dog fur that's
Oh,
right next to our home fell onto the neighbor's home and basically split the home into. Thankfully, no one was badly injured. They
oh,
did have
goodness.
some glass shards that can hit their arms, but so the house is basically destroyed, and I'm sure there's many other homes that have suffered. So it's scary.
I'll go next. I had an opportunity to see true community in action at a Providence Point. It was pretty challenging for a lot of the seniors that live there. It's a 55 and over community. And we have 2 warming centers. And it was great to see owners not just congregate in those areas, but they brought things from their homes. So someone had a lasagna, someone had like makings for soup or whatever it was, but everyone brought things from their homes and they just were so open and willing to share it with their neighbors. And so it was just, I kind of stepped back and just watched everyone just really loving each other and just, say, it's okay. We're here for each other no matter what, doing puzzles, reading, charging phones or whatever. So I just saw community in the making and I was pretty heartened to see that, the belly aching about, I don't have electricity or whatever. And we just had people just surrounding each other and giving comfort. So it was nice to see.
Leslie, I'll go after you because mine's similar. We went for like a 2-hour walk after because what else was there to do?
Yeah.
And it was amazing to see the number of people, anybody who owned a sorry, I can't think what you call it. Anything that could break the limbs off trees were out there. The people who couldn't were dragging limbs away, so it's not in the walkway. And the city's everywhere they can be, but these are regular people. These are my neighbors and people I don't know who are just clearing it so it's not impassable in some cases and just not dangerous in other cases. It was incredible. It was just incredible to see the number of people. I didn't, very few people were just walking. We were, but even we were moving things over, just limbs, right? And so it was just heartwarming. And then a senior center opened up, which is awesome. I live right next to it. My husband charged his phone there. And I had a request, and that is, can we get the text when those texts go out? There's a text that went out that said that a senior center's open. And I forwarded it to groups that I knew of, but I thought, oh, we could get that text. And we, like you, definitely could.
I didn't get that too.
Yeah, there's a text. I got it. Yeah.
I'll
Yeah, I gotta
I'll
run.
find out. Yeah.
Yeah, growing the distribution list seems like a great idea.
Well, I'm just wondering if
Yes, it's something else.
I'll add to my,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
No, I guess we got back ours like after 6 days, so it was quite a long time. But I still had school, so I went to school and then my family just went to work. So like the only time we were at home was like sleeping time. But I guess like my favorite memory was we have a gas stove, so my mom lit it up and we just made pasta together, which was
Yeah.
I'm gonna go next because mine's related. And so we lost power for, I think, over 5 days. And so around 2.5 days and we lost hope in our fridge, right? So
Yeah.
we're like, okay, open the doors. What do we want to eat? And so like everyone kind of grabbed some random stuff. So we had like raviolis and bratwurst, and we're all cooking with in front of our guest stove with headlamps on. And my son said, "This is an awesome memory." So I was just like, "Oh, there's something good about it."
Yeah.
Like, yeah. And so we had a couple of meals like that, just cooking with headlamps on, and yeah.
Oh, that's delightful. I was part of the emergency operations center that got activated for this emergency. I don't live in the city of Issaquah or the city of Sammamish, and was one of those people that was driving in from Seattle as everyone else seemed to be fleeing every day to charge their electric vehicles and go to work and charge all their devices. But got to be part of standing up both of our resilience of our warming centers, charging centers, and it was just a really I think, David Reedy came and spoke to us like earlier this year about this idea of resilience hubs.
Mhm.
He and Jared came and spoke to us about emergency activation. And even though we've had those conversations, the planning for those things is still very nascent. And to see in a lot of ways what we were hoping for, not what we were completely hoping for in the largest activation that we would activate, but seeing seeds of the conversations with boards and commissions and as a staff about what we'd like to be able to activate in an emergency, it was just really cool to see that happen. And to be able to be as nimble as we could. I think so often in the past, what the city would do would be a lot of that public work staff, park staff, getting the trees out of the road. But we haven't often activated a sort of people-facing program in any way. So that was really cool to see that happen. It was a really scrappy situation. Anyone that was at the senior center that saw the chains of plugs that I had to go and buy, and then we kind of had to talk to facilities to make sure, okay, can the senior center actually deal with all these things being plugged in? And we told people small electronics, but we got all sorts of things plugged in, including at Pickering Barn. We had got all sorts of things plugged in when we activated that location. But just really, there was a lot to learn. We're having our first debrief tomorrow, actually. But just really cool to see it start to happen. Lots of lessons learned, but really excited that we could provide emergency response and not just be focused ultimately on where we are now, which is recovery. So
It was amazing.
yeah, it's really cool.
Mhm.
Well, I think everyone went. All right, Dale, over to you, I think, for updates.
Indeed. So I'm going to provide two pieces of update. As you know, this section, we've added it in for this year specifically to make sure that we're coming back, the administration is coming back to the board to talk about the impact of last meeting's discussion, the impact that that's now had and continuing to have. And then I want to give a little bit of a brief update on just the emergency response, because I think that would be good to just share a little bit here about that. And we'll take any questions too. So we had three main items at our last meeting. We reviewed the cultural and religious calendar for the upcoming year. That has now passed and has been taken into account by City Council. It passed at City Council on Monday night and has been adopted for the year. So all of the City Council meetings, board and commission meetings, council committee meetings will be planned around the dates that you all affirmed at our previous meeting. The DEIB glossary went back to the internal equity team. Our subcommittee presented our plan for implementation with some of the suggestions that the equity board recommended. And so we will be coming back. That subcommittee will come back to the equity board mid-year to give an update on implementation. So they're really excited to do that. And we'll bring with us what information and data on progress we can. I think we had a really robust conversation about how are we going to know if it's being used and what's the purpose, and but we'll come definitely with some information about who the glossary has reached, and likely building on just the lunch and learn plan. There was also a recommendation to actually go to each work group and talk with each work group about the glossary, and so that was added on after the discussion we had last month. The last thing that we talked about last month was the school zone safety camera equity impact assessment. The topic of school zone safety cameras went to the City Council on November 25th, I want to say was the date. The date could be wrong, but the Monday prior to the Thanksgiving holiday. Honestly, most exciting council meeting that I've presented at. It was a really robust conversation. If you want to see local governance in action, highly recommend going and watching the recording. The administration was making the recommendation for one new school zone location on Newport Way next to Issaquah Valley Elementary. At one point, it seemed like the council was going to vote for both locations. They ended up landing in a place where we're moving forward with the Issaquah Valley Elementary site, and they recalled the Grand Ridge site to council committee. And the main concern they have over that location ended up being the rapidity with which it can be implemented. So the administration recommended an alternative simply to do with staff capacity, which is one of the concerns called out in the equity impact assessment, that standing up 2 new school zone sites at the same time would be very difficult for staff to manage, and actually likely would need something between 12 and 18 months time to recover from what is anticipated to be the first bump in violations and citation processing from one new location to then an additional new location. And so the council committee wanted to hear more about why it was going to take exactly that long. And so we'll be going back to committee with staff from the police department and the municipal court to talk more about those limitations. So they're still considering a second location. They just wanted more information on why it would take as long, given our staff capacity to implement. So I will add, the equity impact assessment was well regarded by the council. They took the data in there seriously and recommended that, especially the opportunities that are mentioned in there, that those be a serious part of implementation. One of the biggest things that they insisted on and that I'm excited about, I think this group will be excited about as well, is a pretty robust annual report on not just the efficacy of the camera in terms of reducing the incidence of speeding in the zone, but also the impact on the community. And so we'll be using guidance from the state on what that annual reporting looks like. But that came out of a recommendation out of the equity impact assessment and is something that the council adopted as part of the new camera location. So that is my update on those 3 items. I'll pause there in case there are any follow-up questions.
Not a question, but kudos to you for writing up the.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
turns out when your item gets bumped out a month, you have time to do a little bit more work, which is great. It's advantageous for me. The other thing I just wanted to provide a quick update on for this group, and we've already kind of started to talk about it, and I think have different levels of maybe awareness or sight into the city's actions during the response to the wind event. I think one thing I wanted to make sure to talk to this group about was the activation of our 2 resilience hubs, which we called warming and charging centers, because we wanted the labeling of them to be accessible to people. We were like, I don't know if anyone's going to know what a resilience hub is. They certainly know what a warming and charging center is. So the city was able to, on Wednesday, make a plan to activate those locations. Again, I think speaking to the nascency of this even being a thing the city does, but opened a location at the senior center on Thursday, and that location was open through the weekend, and opened a location at Pickering Barn on Friday, and it was also open on Saturday. And on Saturday, I think notable, the city had planned to have a winter market, made the choice, I think wisely, to cancel that winter market, but also encouraged our food truck vendors who were planning to come to that winter market to still come. And provide the opportunity for folks to come and buy hot meals. Really, the focus of both locations was on, I would say, inclusive snacks and beverages. We wanted to make sure that the snacks we offered were, we had something for every dietary restriction. That was a big, I think, a big learning. And I think one of the questions, I think when David and Jared come back to talk about resilience hubs again in the new year, I think there are some good lessons learned, and I'm hoping they'll share around some of our food decisions and how those may or may not have provided maybe a inclusive food for everyone, especially when it came to some serving of hot food that then quickly became clear that not everyone could eat the hot food that was being served because of dietary restrictions. I think on the whole, the resilience hubs were really well received and I think provided much needed support. I think the city is thinking about and will be reflecting on, did we activate quickly enough? Did we activate enough? Should we have activated both sites at the same time? And of course, while this was a devastating storm, we also know that in many ways, this is far from what could be an even more devastating event in the future. And we learned a lot about how ready we were compared to some of our partners, which I think was encouraging, but that we need to be even more ready. There are a lot of other things I could share. We've transitioned from response to recovery. So we're now in recovery mode. We're still engaged in debris cleanup. There is a final debris collection happening at Tibbetts Manor this coming Sunday, and that's the third of those events, and also exploring opportunities for sort of curbside pickup with Recology. Another thing that happened on Monday night that I thought this group in particular would be interested in hearing about, the city council adopted an ordinance allowing for the waiving of permit fees for individuals at or below 80% area median income. We wanted to reduce as many barriers to folks getting what they need to get, say, trees off of their houses, especially if we know they might have a financial barrier to doing that. And so that was adopted by City Council on Monday night and will go into and goes into effect immediately. And that means, when you're applying for a permit to get a tree pulled off of your house or something like that, we're going to try to make the process as straightforward as possible. Originally, the language was for 50% AMI, which is often used because 50% is used by a lot of other organizations. It's your reduced fee ORCA card. You're able to really quickly, without having to share any additional sort of tax information, demonstrate that I qualify for this. The challenge that the council insisted on raising that to 80%, that's really excellent, but it also provides a real challenge when it comes to the city being able to very quickly in a streamlined way validate that that's the case. Our inspectors have been out and about though, and so they already have a pretty good sense of what buildings are likely going to qualify for this, or even it. Although the destruction has been pretty spread, there are, I think, 2 buildings that have red tags, which means there's like significant damage. No one can be inside the building. 8 with yellow tags, which is unsafe to be in parts of the building. And so those will be the primary residences that will be, or buildings that will be looked at first. But yeah, that fee waiver is really exciting. And then there will be fee deferrals for any family making above that income level. So we're in a recovery mode. We're in debris cleanup mode. We also as a city are in the process of really taking stock in the damage to public spaces and really being able to quantify that so that we can qualify for reimbursement. I think it's safe to say we are much further from our tree canopy goals than we were a couple of weeks ago, but getting a sense of exactly what the impact of that has been as well. So all of our teams are still meeting every other day to discuss recovery efforts, and so that will be ongoing over the next few months. And that's the general update, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that folks have.
So for the red tag and yellow tag, are these for city buildings or just buildings?
No, these are private property owned buildings. Okay. The city building that was the most impacted by this storm was actually this building, which had its roof ripped off. Not the full roof, but all the shingles came off in a good layer from right above us. So it's perhaps unsurprising that the technology did not work today when I first was alerted to that in this building, but they got it re-shingled really quickly, which was great. The rest of the city buildings were miraculously pretty unharmed. A lot of our infrastructure had impacts on it. A few of our water pumps and sewer pumps, but we were able to, the city has a lot of really old looking generators that we were able to really quickly make sure we kept all that infrastructure online.
Thank you.
And that was my question. So Pickering Barn and the Senior Center we were able to offer that, but they were running on generators.
They're running on generators.
A lot of time.
It is a lot of time. It required a lot of, I think, really, our fleet manager is perhaps has one of the coolest heads in an emergency of anyone I've ever seen. I always kind of knew this about him, that he was an action guy, but he was able to mobilize those larger generators very quickly. A number of our buildings also permanently have generators, like our public works building, our city hall, they're equipped for that. But we do have a number of mobile generators that we were able to come and with some replacement of some spark plugs, quickly get some buildings online. Yeah. Other questions? Awesome.
I would add that it's not just a warming and charging place, but it's a community place.
Absolutely.
Because I know many people who went there because they live alone.
Yep.
And they just wanted someone to talk to, because now it's day 3.
Yeah.
Day 1, you could go outside and see people. Day 3, they're alone with nothing. It was very impactful to my community.
Oh, yeah.
Really.
I mean, they truly are resilience hubs. I think
Yeah.
at one point we'll get the
Yeah.
lingo. We'll all understand what that means. Yeah, that was definitely the case. I mean, I saw it in both locations. Senior center was packed to the gills.
Yes.
I looked around and I was like, I think I need to remove myself from this space. We are certainly over capacity here.
Yeah.
But even Pickering Barn, you could tell, I mean, much more open space, but we had Disney Plus movies set up and streaming for kids, and people were there doing everything from their literal jobs remotely on computers to, just doing some of the chores that they would have done at home that they needed to do in a warm place.
Yeah.
So
It's awesome. Because it was amazingly fast. I know it is, right? Weren't quite prepared.
I was the only one buying power strips at Fred's. I gotta say that I had my choice. No one else.
Nobody else is
put
doing it.
power strips in a.
No, they were looking
power
at
stripe.
chainsaws.
Yeah. But. Great. Well, I'll provide an update monthly about where things are at. And please don't hesitate to reach out in between if you've got any questions. I'd love to think about, I think, Kelly, your question around the text that went out. I have a feeling it was not city started, but it was CERT started. But I think there is a good question on sort of how do we continue to multiply the impact of, we've got 30 CERT members or so who started those texts within their network.
Yeah, it had language accommodation in it.
Yep.
It just made me think that all the commissioners should be on it.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Awesome.
Just that raises the question for me, when you have a power outage and so people don't have Wi-Fi and internet is super spotty, how do you get a hold of people?
Oh, yes.
And
this is the thing that we had to quickly consider. So our comms team clearly was using our socials as much as possible, but we also went very old school with some flyers. And so we utilized, one of the things that the city uses, especially when we're having, when we have any sort of, like right now, there's the construction happening on the pedestrian park over right off of Front Street. We have these big billboards, sandwich boards that sort of say it's where we post here's what's going on here. We use those pretty liberally in a number of what we consider to be main thoroughfares and places that we also expected people to be walking. And also had flyers that our CERT members who were going around to different parts of the city, grocery stores, et cetera, hand out. We were really lucky to get we have a close partnership with the Circle. And so we had Alicia was able to very quickly translate for us, because we also were having trouble getting in touch with the services we use for translation. And so we were able to get some quick translation from her, at least to get things into Spanish. Knowing that when you look at demographically, linguistically, the community in our city that doesn't speak English as a primary language and speaks English the least well, it is Spanish speakers. And so we knew that was our biggest priority. So I think leveraging our partnerships, but also good old fashioned paper was a thing that we used quickly with it. We realized very quickly on Tuesday that it wasn't going to be just a full court press to phones and whatnot.
Mm.
Yeah. Awesome.
Great.
End of staff report.
Okay, the Dale Show again. So the Equity Board reports.
Yes, the lovely thing on tonight's agenda, we have 2 items. a discussion of our equity board report for the year, the 2024 report, and then a discussion of our 2025 draft work plan. And so while it seems like a Dale show, it's actually going to be the equity board discussion show, and I'm going to take notes. And so I'm hopeful that we'll spend a certain amount of time, maybe 20 minutes or so on this first item, and then about 30 minutes or so on the next item. But really the purpose of tonight is to give feedback and input. We're not voting on or adopting anything tonight. What I'll do with tonight's discussion is I'll take that feedback and I'll implement it into both documents. And in January, when we gather again, we will move to adopt both documents that evening. So this is just meant to be open discussion, but we'll start with the board report. So I hand it back over to you to facilitate.
Okay, so I think have folks to read the draft report?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, or do we need like a couple of minutes?
Like a couple of minutes.
Okay, and one thing I'll just maybe give you a prompt as you all kind of refresh on this is, as you read the 2024 draft report, I want you all to be thinking about what do you think is the equity board zone? Like, what have we been doing well? Where have we made the most impact? And then also think about, is that where we want to be making the most impact? So we can think about those types of questions as we go into our 2025 work plan conversation.
Mhm.
Yes, and I left that comment in so that we would not forget to discuss.
Give it about 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Folks feeling like they're in a good place? Okay. So maybe before we jump into that meatier question, Is there anything that feels like it's missing from here that you think we accomplished in the past year? And I also want to thank Dale for drafting this up. Anything missing?
I didn't see anything.
Would it be appropriate to say that we had turnaround in this team? If we have 2 new members and 2 that left, is that something that's important that we've been able to fill those seats? And I don't know, terms are expiring this year, but
Yeah.
it takes effort to do that because we had to interview folks and
Yeah.
we're fortunate to get new members on board.
I think we could definitely talk about welcoming new members. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll add that to the, this top part, the top part, I think. Yeah.
And we added the concept of mentoring, at least a bit.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's an ad and an important ad.
You know, I hadn't thought about this, but I also, I do think some of our new routines are also really notable. And so I wonder where to include that. It almost feels like that can go towards the end. As some like, I don't know exactly where, but I do think there's probably something to add about some of the ways that we've sought to build more connection and
Yeah.
within our board.
Yeah, I think it'd be important to have like a paragraph, like new members and also introducing like the question. Okay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like how that helped us bond as a board one this year.
Maybe that's its entirely own paragraph, like the welcoming of new members. I think that's a great point.
Like in your last sentence, you
Yeah.
talk about the forming,
Yeah.
warming, and storming. So I think those are kind of the norms, and I think there's something about like maturing, right? So we've said goodbye to members as terms got, ended, and new members, new chair, new vice chair.
Yep.
Just, like all of those things. You have the new routines.
Yeah, I like that. Absolutely. I can add something in that. I do think that section can be built out a little bit more to talk about that in particular. And I like the idea of framing it as a maturing of the board. I think that's a great way to think about all of those changes, really. Yeah.
And Dale, I just echo Richie's comments. I mean, nobody could have articulated this the way you have.
I had last year's to work from, which is good.
So thank you.
Worse. Anything else missing? That's a great question.
So I guess, so across these different, activities and accomplishments, where do you think we had our most impact?
Or where have you all felt the most satisfied in the feedback you've given or the input you've given? I'd be like really curious to know if there's like a meeting that really, I can think of a few meetings that stuck out to me as meetings where it's like, whoa, we got some stuff done. And I feel like this is gonna have a lasting impact, but I'd be really like, I'm curious to hear what you all also feel.
Just kind of building off of there, I think one of the newer routines also has been the report out about what happened because of
Yes.
this.
Yeah.
So that helps us know where we
Yeah.
made impact. So I think that's a nice part of the routine.
Yeah.
Of the board.
I think we had a meeting, it was focused on transportation. I felt that it was a great discussion and an opportunity for us to put an equity lens on, the issue that I remember speaking on was the fact that we need shelters that are comfortable and well lit for people to be able to utilize, because that's a mode of transportation for many people for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a great discussion, and I thought it really had a place for equity.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, our meeting with the Human Services Commission about the light bill. I think that was one of our productive meetings, like most productive, and
Yeah.
I also learned a lot. And I think like a common theme I see is like diversity, equity, and inclusion,
Mhm.
which are pretty important for equity boards.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we're in the zone.
Yep, that does feel good. We're in the right place. Yep.
One sort of common thread across a lot of the meetings is just sort of this, the inquiry and the spirit of the inquiry.
Mhm.
And it often unfolds as like, you know, one question leads to another, and at some point you can tell that there's this sort of aha moment when things click and the person that's presenting is like, oh, I see where you're coming from,
Yeah.
and I can kind of see how that could be implemented.
Yep.
So I feel like the Q&A is really helpful, and I wonder if there might even be some sort of process that can be built around that.
Mhm.
I mean, it's worked organically so far.
Yeah.
But maybe looking towards the next year is like, do we have an approach to how we
Yeah.
acquire and get feedback?
Yeah. Yeah, it makes me think about one of the work plan items around the evolution of the equity framework too. Which I'm hoping we sink our teeth into a little bit more in 2025. Because I think there's some potential there to both set ourselves up, but also set the folks coming to us up to get to that place maybe a little bit faster.
So I'm thinking about your comment there. Does that mostly come up when we're doing that equity framework implementation? So when folks are coming and talk about how they've done their kind of their analysis and we're kind of probing a little further?
Yeah,
Is that-
yeah.
Okay, so it's
Yeah,
the
the-
more.
The 3 or 4 meetings where at least
Mhm.
I can recall, the transportation, the parks and recreation.
Mhm.
Um. Sorry, I'm blocking out, but at
Yeah,
least 3 or 4 of those.
yeah.
But it's around the equity framework.
One thing that I would say I'm most proud of was the letter
Yeah.
that we sent over to council. And kind of in response to some other stuff that was happening in neighboring cities, but I also feel like it was nice to feel heard and to see like that there was action kind of in response. So I felt like that was a step in our maturity as well, in terms of like finding our voice to advocate for things like that.
I would, from my perspective, I think that was one of the most impactful things the board has done. I think I said this last time, in a budget biennium where many things were removed. Even though we didn't get as much dollars towards an equity impact assessment as we had originally hoped, to still get dollars added in for that and a commitment from the administration, that is going to be a priority going into the next 2 years. That was big. And I think that came in part through the letter. I think it came in little bits. I think there were lots of little moments where either your board chair was advocating for something, I was advocating for something, but I think that letter cemented it. And cemented it not only for our mayor, but also for our legislators, our city council, who ultimately say yes or no to the budget. So I think you should be really proud of that decision.
Is that something that should be in the report out?
It is.
It is.
It
Yeah, when
is.
did that?
Yes, under your policy recommendations. And it comes up both as a Pride Month and Juneteenth acknowledgement.
I see,
and also
yeah.
the promotion of an equity impact assessment. I also think, I'll add, I mean, I think the glossary, although maybe a little bit, the equity impact assessment is a very public, it went into the budget. You wrote a letter for it. The glossary, I think, we'll see how it plays out, but I think it's going to have some of the longest term impact because it's really about changing the way the city talks about what it does. And I know that's in an early stage still, but I do think some of the work that you all advise on, that is our sort of internal staff culture work. So not just projects and programs, but even how people think and orient towards the work they do. I just think that culture shift stuff has some of the biggest potential. So I think the more that this board engages with the stuff the equity team is thinking about, as that team becomes a more robust actor, that's a place to have real impact as well.
Yeah, one thing, I guess, to flip it that I'm struggling with, like in the first sentence of this report, amplify the voices of diverse communities. I don't literally doing that, despite, being at different community cultural events and things like that. And I know, Ray, that's been something that you're passionate about. And so I don't know if we're doing that or if we're getting there with what we're doing and if there's energy or should we be doing more? I think, part of my take on that is like if we're building relationships or who in the city should be building relationships with community members. And part of me wants to say it's the staff people who own the programs to do the work. So I don't necessarily feel like it's my role or our board's role literally to do that, but I guess I'm just wondering, is there something we need to be doing in that space around amplifying voices? It's a question.
Yeah, I was gonna say that until we got to the 2025.
Yeah.
Comment around that, but I think we have a lot of lessons here just in these 3 years that we've been in existence. The way the process has been here, if you invite other commissions to meet with us, if there's appetite for us to sit in at their meetings and just listen and say, what is going on with you, X commission, that might have an equity lens to it, and maybe we are that lens. And the reason I say that is I've sat in a specific commission, which is the Human Services Commission. I was not invited. I inserted myself in the process and advocated. I'm curious what you guys talk about. Can I just sit in and listen? And I learned a lot of things. And so that's what got me thinking about how can equity play a role in the conversation that this commission is having. So if we feel as a group that there might be commissions that would benefit from an equity board member sitting in and listening and maybe bring back to us, maybe that's something we can consider.
That's an awesome idea.
Right?
I like that.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting. So we did actually have a request from the Transportation Advisory Board to have some equity board members come and join, not necessarily a joint meeting. And my pose back to them was, can you tell me an agenda? Can you show me an agenda? Because what I don't want to do is just send a board member to a meeting and give them let's find a strategic agenda where you feel like there's going to be a topic that could really use an equity board member's lens on it. I think the cool thing also about the Transportation Advisory Board is they actually requested from their board and engaged in some equity training specifically around transportation. So they're already, as far as boards and commissions go, they're actually a little bit further along their journey, which is really cool. And I think could be maybe a good first, as we get into our 2025 conversation, might be a good first stop potentially, especially if anyone's particularly interested in transportation. That could be a potential as well. So I think there is definitely more opportunity for that.
Just curious, Priti, if your question was also around maybe other channels outside of what we're doing with the other city councils departments.
Yeah, so just let's think about is that like a zone of work, like a function of some sort that we could or should be doing more of? Because I would say I'm not sure if we're fulfilling that currently. Yeah, because I know, we've got the cultural community or community cultural events, but I can't tell you, I've been to those and I haven't talked to a ton of people.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else, any big suggestions or recommendations on this report that we might want to make ahead of the next meeting where we would be voting to approve it?
great. I think we were kind of naturally moving to the next topic anyways. I think it is not surprising in this group that we are looking ahead to what is the impact that we may have in the coming year. So I'll provide a little bit of a frame. So our board, I actually don't know if you all know this. Also, unfortunately, printer was not very smart. It definitely cut off orders 3 and 4 when it came to when exactly the things fall, but we can still see the topics and the items in general. I'm actually not sure if I shared this. So last year in 2024, the equity board was one of 3 boards that piloted a more formatted, structured work plan. The city has not always asked its boards and commissions to have from the start of the year, a really clear plan for the year of what they were going to engage in. We found this to be really helpful. Although I modified and adjusted as we went, we actually did a lot of what was on our work plan, which was was quite exciting for me, someone that likes to create a strategic plan and follow it. And so now all of our boards and commissions will be using this template this year to plan their work from the beginning and make sure that they're making progress towards that. And so all of the board and commission liaisons are going to be using this with their boards and commissions. So there's a little piece of impact you didn't even know you had this year. So thank you for that. The work plan itself is broken up into a few different sections. We've got this part on the front, which is around, you've got a section for sort of general work plan items. You can think of that as the stuff that we get reports on, the stuff that you discuss as a group, the stuff that you vote on. Then there's some of the administrative item pieces, one of which we're engaging in tonight, which is a discussion of our work plan. But you also see some portions in here that are a little bit more of the invisible work, or the work that I do with 1 or 2 of you or 3 of you. So the interviewing board recruitment strategy, as Ray alluded to, we have a number of positions that are going to be opening up this year. And so we'll be engaging in some of that recruitment starting in February. The welcoming of new board members, and that's a big part of what I think this group is really committed to doing in an intentional way. The election of officers, some of this is just a single agenda item, but all really important administrative tasks that do take up time. We have basically a whole meeting in June usually where we're doing administrative tasks. The board report and the work plan for the upcoming year. And then you'll notice here in this last section, some potential future work items. So some things we might consider adding in as we get clearer on whether it fits within the scope of our work. And then below that, you can see, so you've got kind of the big overarching items, and then below you've kind of got the month by month plan. So taking what's above and then putting that actually into, does this fit into a schedule? Can we actually do more than, the 2 things or the 1 thing? Can we get that into an agenda? So you can see a suggestion, really just a different way of communicating the same information above, but I think a little bit more helpful to actually see it broken down by month. And one thing I would like to discuss tonight, you'll notice it's not so easy to see in black and white here or grayscale. There are 2 meeting dates that I already know we're going to have conflicts for. Our regular January meeting date is on January 1st, which is the day that the city hall is closed, and I hope everyone is not at work if you can be. So I'm going to propose changing that date. We'll discuss that during other business. And then also October. Our current October 8th meeting date conflicts with Yom Kippur, one of our cultural religious calendar holiday dates. And so we'll need to reschedule that as well. We do not need to reschedule that this evening, but I wanted to give folks a heads up as far in advance as I could. And then also noted on the calendar, our August recess, which will take, as all of our boards, commissions, and city council do, take the month of August off. So just to, summer break. It's important and good for everyone. So that's just a little bit of the structure of the document. You'll notice the main work items, and I'll talk a little bit about each of those, and then we can have a broader discussion about them. So one is the equity impact assessment. There are kind of 2 components to that. One is that we have already had an orientation for, I wouldn't say they've been like fully onboarded, but I had an orientation for our graduate school consulting team from the Evans School at the University of Washington. They're going to be supporting the sort of pre-work that we're anticipating before bringing on a full-time consultant for the equity impact assessment. One of the big questions that we discussed in our equity team meeting a couple of weeks ago was what is the work that we think is well suited to a graduate student consulting group versus some of the more technical or expensive work that we might want a consultant to do. And so we're hoping that graduate school group will come to the board in January or February, likely February, but January or February to consult with the board specifically on their work and get feedback. And they'll also present to the board in May or early June, May or June, depending on exactly when the end of their project is going to land. We're a fun board because we're the first of the month. So for some people, May, they're thinking mid-May or late May, but that would actually be our June meeting. So they'll come to the board a few times, but really would like the board to advise on their work, as their work is going to lay the groundwork for the equity impact assessment consultant team that will come on board in the second half of the year. And then, of course, this board would engage with that consultant, the non-graduate consultants as well, around the work that they would do. And so you can see in here that sort of February, April, we'll have a sort of every other month cadence around that work is what I'm proposing at this juncture. DEIB training for board and commission members. This has been something that has showed up on this board's work plan a couple of times, actually. We haven't had, I think, the staff capacity to move this item forward, but it's something I know our city clerk is thinking about as we look ahead to the June orientation for new board and commission, for all new board and commission members, but also thinking about if there are boards and commissions that are particularly interested in doing some subject matter specific training, potentially getting some feedback from the equity board prior to that board liaison doing that training for their board. Equity framework pilot implementation. As Karthik mentioned, we've had a lot of folks come to us and share their approach to the implementation of what is generously called the equity framework, what you all know, I call the equity questions. I think that we are at a place where we've gotten a good amount of feedback. And I think the question that I'd like to pose to this group this year is what does the evolution of that tool look like? That would largely be me coming to you. It would be a little bit like the glossary, like there would likely be a lot of me leading that conversation with this group. But I think it is a tool that is one part. And I think that we now have what we need to figure out what the evolution of that tool looks like based on the presentations we've gotten. And then, as was mentioned and discussed at our November meeting, the glossary. The glossary will come back to the board mid-year and towards the end of the year because you all would like it to, and two, we'd like to get feedback on the implementation of the tool and how it's going. And then any updates we might want to make to language. So the terms in the glossary as we think about the ongoing evolution of that tool as well. So those are the main items that I am recommending for the board to advise on. Would love to get feedback on those items and then also consideration of some of the other potential future work plan items and anything else that you're thinking of, any sort of seeds that were planted by Prithi's question around like where you all felt that you've had the most impact and where are places we're maybe not living yet into the full vision of the board's intent. So I'll stop babbling and open up just the discussions. Maybe with first the conversation of, how do you all feel about these first 4 items as items we want to pursue and then advise on in the upcoming year? Is there anything that feels missing from those? Really, there are things that feel like they're missing, but anything in those 4 that you see issue with or you feel like is outside of what the board should be advising on?
The one, as you were describing the glossary, again, I think we have an opportunity as it initially gets launched to kind of evaluate what the impact is, right? Because I know I feel it too, like I feel like it's got great potential and indirectly to support better community engagement, right? Because people will now have the right words, will feel more comfortable doing that type of work. So I would be really curious and to if there were maybe a more structured kind of evaluation process associated with that. So we could really kind of document it.
Yeah. I know one thing we talked about is actually had a really long discussion about this afterwards, because the big question was like, how will we evaluate whether the tool is quote unquote working?
Yeah,
And one of the things we talked about is actually it like will be the absent, like what everyone at the table agreed is, it's like, it actually might not be the use of the terms that are recommended, but the absence of the terms that we're saying people should avoid.
Yes.
And then we talked about how hard that would be to document. But we also talked about the use of our internal staff survey that we normally give biannually, so every other year. That's such a confusing word. We really should have a different word for,
Yeah.
but anyways, but given a lot of what the city has gone through in the last 6 months with the budget and our staff reductions, we're going to be giving it this year. And we have an equity section in the survey. And so we've already earmarked some questions about the glossary, or whether it be a question directly about the glossary or a question about the equity resources and tools that you have used and found value in, having that be one of the options for sure, if it were to be structured that way. So a note has been made. I still think, I mean, it's an anonymous survey, so I think we can expect people are honest. And as the person that runs the survey and has read all the open response, people are honest in that survey. I think the question is the difference between self-report and actual behavior change, and how you're able to see that behavior change. I think everyone on our equity team knows the people they're thinking of, that they're like, I'm excited for the language to change. But I think that's a little bit hard to quantify. So I think we're wrestling with that same
yeah.
thing of like, how do we quantify the impact when it seems like we're not going to get a baseline. That'd be anecdotal. And so, yeah, how do you do a quasi experiment to some degree?
Sure.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it would be important to do something there, and I'm glad you all have been thinking about it, because we're in a climate where this stuff is not as welcome.
Mhm.
So the more we can show what the benefits are to doing this type of work, I think the better.
But we will definitely come in June or July with a report on the results of the staff survey at the very least, in terms of people being able to self-report, this is a tool I used, found value in.
Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity. I know budget is tight, but like to get baseline data versus just capturing a retrospective. But
I guess my question would be like, what's the baseline data?
I mean, we'd have
Yeah.
to capture it, like, yeah, I mean, we'd have to know, like, comfort. To me, it's like, folks' comfort in talking about equity.
Which we do ask. Yeah, so
Okay,
we
so
actually do
there's-
have that. We do have some baseline data.
Okay,
I guess the question I have is like, do we expect that indicator to change? Yeah,
hopefully over time, maybe not in the
Yeah.
first 6 months. But
Totally.
Yeah, yeah.
but retaining that question for
Mhm.
sure.
Yeah, but I mean, I think maybe it's like a exercise in what are the expected outcomes of this, and then seeing if there's data from the past that line up to those outcomes.
Yeah, we ask a question about comfortability having discuss sort of DEI conversations with members of your direct team, your department, across city departments. We also ask a question specifically about the experience of verbal aggressions, and sort of like, did you intervene? Did someone else intervene? Did no one intervene? So we do have some of that baseline data that we can look at.
Yeah, also like maybe, conversations with diverse members of the public or people from other groups outside of your own, things like that. Yeah, sorry, I don't want to get into like an evaluation design conversation, but yeah, I just thought, the more we can, if we're just starting. Yeah.
No, and that's super helpful, because actually we do have more baseline data than
Mhm.
we have. It's broader, it's less direct about the tool itself.
Yeah.
But we do have two iterations of baseline data on equity related comfortability, self-report,
Yeah.
microaggressions.
So maybe
things like
chase it with some focus groups later or something.
Yeah.
I've forgotten this, but are we gonna post this glossary?
that.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, it'll be made available on the equity board page following initial internal city staff rollout. We want to make sure staff gets it first,
Mhm.
and then we'll share it publicly. So by the end of the first quarter.
And you're doing some internal trainings on it.
Yes.
Would it be possible to attend? I'd be really interested,
Yeah.
because I've already used it with some people. It was
Yeah.
very interesting. Great.
Yeah, we'll be designing the trainings likely in January, I
Yeah.
think is our plan. And so I would imagine those will happen in February.
Mhm.
So yeah, I'll definitely keep the board apprised of when they're happening.
Yeah,
And it'll likely be, at least one of them will be like a virtual
yeah.
one that we'll record and then keep that in perpetuity.
Because I'm using it as a tool to talk to people about stuff
Love that.
that they're saying.
Yeah.
And it's really quite, I mean, it's, if you're nice about it, they're quite amenable to learning.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So what I'm hearing is DEIB glossary, keep this in the work plan.
Yeah.
Checks.
For sure.
Yes. Yes.
Those other 3 items, do those feel within what you're expecting to advise on? Do they feel like they're aligned to the board's mission?
I just have a question on the timing.
Yeah.
For the impact assessment, I thought that would be driving the pilot. So the pilot is grayed out in January. Are they looking for us to start thinking about a group who is going to be acting as this pilot? Doesn't the impact assessment drive that conversation?
It doesn't, because we won't be like eliminating that tool. It's still a tool the city will use internally, I think, for its own assessment of programs and policies between now and whenever we have the recommendations from the equity impact assessment. And so I think, my goodness, arrived at 7:12.
Yeah, grab the packet. We're talking, Dale printed out documents, so in the packet, yeah.
Because that's the first item, Dale.
It is.
January, where the
Mhm.
timing of this is. So provide input and feedback on city projects, policies, initiatives, and across the city. So we would have to think about those projects and apply what we've been discussing without having the impact assessment in our hands. That's what I'm thinking.
Well, yeah, so it's sort of continuing the work we've been doing around providing feedback to city staff.
Oh,
I think,
see.
I don't want us to cease the work we've been doing as we work in an ongoing way with the consultant group. What I'm imagining, Ray, for January in particular, is us taking a look at those 13 questions and asking ourselves, well, how does this need to evolve to become a true framework? Right now, it's, in my very humble opinion, it's 1/4 of a framework. It's sort of one portion of what would actually be a framework of implementing an equity lens on the work. And so I think it's time for us to think about what the
Mhm.
evolution is, and I think this board should advise on that. So
Okay.
I think your point is well made. There's kind of like a few things happening. It's sort of like, well, we know there are improvements that need to happen overall to the vision and direction. But we're not going to stop sailing our ship just because we're not exactly sure if we should be going northwest or north. It would be, I think, like a little. I don't want us to stop just because we know we need to just change direction a little bit. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's just, everything hinges on what the verbiage is of the impact assessment. I think that's just.
Totally agree.
Having a pilot, you're right, we've been doing that already. But
Yeah.
it might change based on the outcome of the assessment.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then my other question was, if are you, like the stuff, I jumped already to the month work plan, but if you're looking for stuff to put under general work plan items, is it appropriate to say we're going to continue our involvement with Black History Month, with LGBTQ Pride Month?
Mhm.
Where should that land? Should that land in the specific month, or should that land in the general?
That's a great question.
Also welcome week too. maybe.
Yeah.
Welcome week.
So the community and cultural
Yeah.
events as a general work plan
Yep.
item.
Yep.
Yeah, I guess they can all be lumped into that, in that one line, right? Continue the engagement with cultural events, because that
Yeah.
captures Pride Month, that captures Black History Month.
Yep.
That captures both.
Yep. But I think adding that in there makes a big, I think, absolutely. Yes, you have a concerned look on your face.
Well, I'm just confused, like, I'm not sure if we're already at the stage where we are brainstorming extensions, expansions.
Yeah.
But I don't want to get to that point afterwards. We want to close out anything else.
Well, I guess the question is on the other general work plan items that are listed here, that we haven't discussed. So DIB training for board and commission members, which again, would like you to advise on what we put together as an idea for that, and then how it goes afterwards, and then some potential, and you can see that's happening like spring until May, given that that orientation happens in June. I don't imagine it will be a work plan item every month, but I will likely come with it at least 2 of those months. I have yet to meet with Tisha to discuss exactly how we want to structure that. So that meeting with her will happen in January, and then we'll get a plan together. And then, yeah, just I feel like we are on board with advising on the equity impact assessment, but we just haven't, no one said yay or nay on that. And so want to get thoughts. And then, yes, Karthik, additional ideas, we'll dive in.
Just one comment on the general work plan items. I'm wondering if, like, I have like lots of feelings and thoughts about training. And so more than what would come up on as an agenda item. And I don't know if other folks have like strong feelings or ideas about any of these items in particular. So I think what I'm wondering is like, would it be helpful if we had like a subcommittee or someone who would like volunteer to like dig a little deeper into some of this, like to do more than just a superficial kind of advice, but yeah. So just wanting, if that's an opportunity, wanting to put it out there for folks who might want to dig in more on specific items.
Absolutely. I think given the little sprint that will happen around that in the first half of the year, when I present the original idea in February, I think if we want to propose a subcommittee to go a little deeper and meet a few times in between, similar to our like prep for welcoming week this year, we can absolutely do that. Totally.
We'll get there when we get there.
February. Okay. Speak now or speak later, but I'm going to open it up to other ideas.
Sure, I've got a few, but I'll start with just one. And I'll try to tie it to things that we're already doing, so it doesn't feel like we're expanding scope too much, or if it is, then we'll slash. But tied to the equity framework, one thing that seems to come up as a common thread through multiple of these conversations through the year is just how we get the data that we need to inform projects and policies and initiatives and decision making. And it's always challenging because often these, the data that we need to make clear decisions is not available. And so we sort of have to maybe ask proxy questions that help us to get to that data, or look at other alternatives. So I'm just wondering if we could try to come up with ways in which we can help guide the gathering of data and the asking of proxy data questions to help us, better inform policies and decisions. And maybe there's some common threads in various different topics there. So that's, maybe a data gathering framework or something like that.
I think that's a big part of the evolution of the equity questions into a framework. I think that's going to be a big part of that discussion. Yeah. Totally agree.
Okay. The other, can I go? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the other is, I was curious if we might, this ties back to maybe the question that you brought up earlier. Could we immerse ourselves in, also ties to what you were saying, are there ways for us to immerse ourselves in known areas of inequity that are just happening in the city, not necessarily within the different departments? This is a bit vague, but I'm still forming this thought. But first to understand better where we know there's inequity, can we understand how severe it is and what forms does it take, et cetera, to then kind of channel our efforts more in that direction.
Well, I have to throw that back at you. Are there ones that you're thinking of that there might be ones that we should
I mean,
focus on?
The farmer's market is like one example where I'm just like, maybe we're just observers, but we could sort of be there. I can volunteer to be there, go there pretty much every time it happens.
Yeah.
I'd like to understand how does that, how are people participating? Are there ways for us to gather data on like who's using the farmer's market? Who are the buyers? Who are the sellers? Is it, is there access for different communities, different people, et cetera? That's one thought, but yeah, it's like more.
I kind of hear two things in that. I hear both an interest to be in spaces and observe, but also I also hear in this particular case, like a city service that there's still some learning potential to do a little bit more about. Like we've never had Kelly Diane come and present on the way that she thinks about equity in the management of the market, the design of the market, the implementation of SNAP and EBT at the market over the course of the last few years, and how we have all the data on this. This is something she and I worked on their impact statement just a couple of months ago. And so there could also just be an opportunity. There might be some little corners of the organization that would be good to hear from again as well. So I kind of hear two things there. One of like being in places, but also I hear learning more about some of the work that we haven't necessarily heard from yet too. So
I think related, another example was that one that Connie brought forward around how welcoming the city spaces and the buildings. Yeah.
Right. And I've chatted with facilities. I think it's actually already in here. They're going to be coming to a meeting in the new year.
And I think I'd also be curious to see, we just had a very big kind of disaster happen. And for me in the district, one of the big eye openers was when COVID hit, the inequities in that students and parents were able to access was even more visible. And so I would love to debrief about the bomb cyclone and learn more about which communities were more impacted than others, so that would advise us and help us better understand how we prepare for future natural disasters or disasters in general. Because it's definitely certain people are able to bounce out of those disasters a lot better than others. And what are we doing to prepare? So I don't know how to put that in, because I'm very curious to address that, because I know I've worked with David Reddy in the Resilience Hub and such. So I don't know if it's through him or if the city has some data, or we need to build some listening spaces to find out, hey, how did you fare and what did you need? And were you able to access what you need and what services were available and not available?
Yep.
Well, the school would have great data on that. Like the students, which ones weren't able
But
to
see,
get
this
the regular access to others.
100% we could, but the school is not as responsible and the school shut down, right? And so we're not the ones who are reacting to the natural disaster, the city and the community respond with resources and support system. And so my question is, when the did, how did the people, how were they able to get their resources? We can survey families to find out what happened to them, but that's not really an appropriate use of resources, because it's never going to be the district's responsibility to act on the data. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was just thinking, as far as we're all talking about data, is how are we getting that data? There has to be a source for it. So for example, if the principal of the school sent out an email inquiring, hey, students, did you have an issue with this? And then you guys tally it up. There was like 50 students that weren't able to get A, B, and C while the others were. And then maybe dig into that population and say, well, is there some sort of inequity there that we can divulge? And then use that as a sampling to broaden not only within the school, but within the larger city, right? Just access the things that other people might have had and others didn't.
I can say, so you please watch the video of the first hour of the meeting. We talked a little bit about that, and we'll also we're in recovery mode now, and so we're actually having our first true like post-event debrief. We've kind of just been in response, and just transitioned to like more recovery. So we're finally going to have this larger debrief as an organization about, what worked, what didn't work, where I will say, and I didn't say this earlier, like equity was one of the key pillars of Jared's activation. But I think we also won't know necessarily, like this will continue to have ripple effects over the next number of months. We do and are working on, and I haven't told the vendor yet who got the contract, but we do have a survey, a community survey coming up. We give that survey every other year. It's scientifically valid based off the demographics of our community. And we will be asking some questions related to the wind event in the survey, and some like specific questions to understand the impact that different communities experience, different individuals, households experienced. And we'll be able to cut that data by demographics. So we'll know, and geographics. I mean, we'll know some of that information as well.
Interesting.
So, yeah. And there were other exciting, I don't want to repeat, so I'll tell you once we're done. Other,
So one thing down in administrative items, we have the welcome new board members. When we were talking about the equity framework, it reminded me, so I don't know, Leslie, have you seen a copy of the equity framework? Like the 13 questions?
I don't think I've seen it.
Yeah, so I think we actually have like content to onboard to, more than just like, hey, welcome, nice to have you here, right? Like there's the equity framework, the DEIB glossary now, the cultural calendar, maybe it's the strategic plan,
Yeah.
So there's certain things that are part of an onboarding process as well.
Yep, that's a great point.
So maybe that's part of the mentoring content, maybe.
Are they all accessible on like a OneDrive document that all of us have access to, that we can just kind of go to?
No, we finally have, I think, some guidance on internal, external sharing through SharePoint that honestly we didn't have until 2 or 3 months ago. And so I think there's also the potential for that to start being a thing that exists and that lives. And so I'll make a note to look into that. I actually, now that we have the guidance, have to read the guidance. Next step. But I'll look into that too, because it would be good to have something that you all can go to a folder, a shared SharePoint folder that we all have access to and be able to access that.
It'd be good because I know I don't always, actually never, listen to recordings from previous meetings. And I always say I'm going to, and I'm like, oh, I don't know. So, yeah. Making it easy.
Thinking forward
Yes,
thinking.
exactly.
Some of the stuff though, if it's available publicly, it could just be links on the equity board's page.
Yes.
Even.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Adding
that
transparency
section.
for everyone.
Yeah.
One more thought slash idea. Again, I'm not sure if this is within scope, but I'm personally very curious about how other cities' equity boards operate. With a chance to maybe have a little like show and tell about like, I don't know, how does Bellevue do it? How does North Bend do it?
Yeah.
If they have equity. If that could be arranged, I don't know how complicated that might be, but.
I can explore. It might not take then the form of like a board meeting. But we can definitely, I happen to know mostly Olympia is like the city that I would say most closely talk to all the time. But they're oddly like a similar size when not in session, and have a similar sized organization and a lot of the same. We're often like either 2 steps ahead or 2 steps behind what they're working on as a result. In fact, theirs is not called an equity board, but their group has been working on an equity impact assessment with a consulting group for the last couple of years. And so it was one of the big drivers, and that being something that we are now pursuing and working on. So, but I think I could look into that. I can do a little bit of inquiry. Yeah. Other thoughts?
So, putting it out to Canal and Varnica. Is there, I'm thinking there might be some generational things like, this side of the older side of the table might be skewed a certain way. So like, are there issues coming up in like, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging that feel particularly relevant to like high schoolers, youth that you're not hearing come up in this work plan or in the past topics we've talked about?
I guess the main thing, I am hearing it being talked about, but I think a main problem, especially at UW, is like diverse populations like not being like given certain resources or like not having access to certain things that others are having. But those communities are either small or they're not heard of, so no one knows about them. But I think that is something that we have talked about, but that is a common problem, I think, now that is, not discussed in like formal boards like this. But
Yeah, I really like the diversity, equity, and inclusion glossary. Like, I think a lot of high schoolers, they don't really think about what they say. They just say it, not about the impact it'll have on other people. And I think if it would be good to like look into a way to, I guess, educate more high schoolers, like using these kind of words will make these people feel excluded. And just having like an honest conversation with them. Like if someone came to me, like I'm not like, at least for me, if I found myself doing that, I know I'm not purposely trying to do it. Like I remember back in our meeting when I forget someone was doing public comment and was talking about the words and the effect it could have. I was like, oh, I didn't even think about that. I think that's what a lot of high schoolers would be going through. And just having that realization, I think, would be really helpful.
Could that lend itself? I'm trying to think of like what a next step could be there. Thinking about like the youth advisory board and sharing the glossary with them to see about how to scale it out to more youth community groups.
Definitely.
we can bring that up in our next meeting.
Are you both on? Okay, fantastic.
Yeah. We're doing like a STEM and art fair and civic engagement conferences, so we can definitely bring it up in one of those.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also I think maybe like kind of putting this out there towards high schoolers or specifically in schools would help us.
We also in school we have social emotional learning, and it's always been like no one really pays attention, but like I think it's also good, like important that I think we should incorporate some kind of like equity, or it doesn't necessarily need to be equity, just at least acknowledging that our words matter, and because that's never really brought up. It's mostly just like annoying surveys that you have to take about. But I think that would be more helpful, and like I said earlier, that self-realization and checking yourself.
Yeah.
I think it'd be a good idea for the youth advisory board who attend the Issaquah School District, give that feedback as a board to the Issaquah School District board. Because as someone who has talked about those kinds of teachings in SEL classes and how it's done, it is a big conversation.
Yeah.
And for my department, it has been a big frustration on how to do it so that students are learning, because it has been a lot of effort made. And as adults, sometimes make lessons, it doesn't fall well. It's not really listening because what is the accountability? And there's also a lot of pushback, surprisingly enough. I'm not sure it's the exact from community and some people as to what is being taught in that.
Fair.
So it's not something that the school district can come and say, hey, we're going to do this, and people are going to say, where is this in the standards for you to be teaching? So there are certain things that can be addressed. So if there's something specific you're looking for, as a youth advisory board, you do have power, and you should leverage that power to work with the school board and work with the district to make such things happen. It's as a school district, we have things we can do, and it is all around education and the standards towards iOS.
So maybe there's an opportunity for some collaboration with YAB to see what support that group that you all might need if you do want to carry something forward, or, you know, lesson learned from the letter writing of this board to our essentially our school board or the city council. You know, how can we apply some of what we learned there, if that's something that,
Actually, you can bring it up to Ken.
yeah, if you bring it up and then you can let me know, and then we can
Yeah.
put it into an agenda item. I'm also kind of curious, you know, Karthik brings up this, like, you know, like how does the city think about the farmer's market? I'm kind of also curious about if there are any other topics or things that the city does, or that you're curious about what the city does that, you know, you two would like to learn more about, because that is also an unofficial part of the purpose of you being here, not only to provide your insights and perspective, but also to learn about how the city works. And so if there's something that you're like, oh, the farmer's market sounds cool, but also like, here's this really specific thing that I wonder what the city does. You know, would love to make room for those staff members to come and present as well. So think on it. Let me know.
So Varnika, you said something about diverse populations not having access. That kind of reminds me of what Karthik said around what, how immerse ourselves in real equity issues, something like that. So if you all have like examples of maybe a diverse population that's not being adequately served, that's something we could try to dig in on. I think we have to just kind of hone in a little bit more specifically about what group that might be and what the issue is. Yeah,
Or
but
what the area, like if there's a particular area where we feel like the resources aren't being made accessible. I mean, I also think it relates a little bit to the welcoming environment
yeah,
as well.
Well, I have to throw this in there because the garage, our neighbor here, has struggled to establish a similar facility in the Sammamish area. And I think I looped you into one of those meetings, right? So there's been a lack of interest, but that's a haven for students to just go hang out and feel comfortable and welcome for different backgrounds. So if there's any way for us to, and I sit on one of their committees, and they told me that they've just struggled to get the approval to set up a similar thing. So they've had to kind of set up shop at a library where they're going to designate a time and a place for teens to just hang out. Have an opportunity. Those that feel left out. This is a haven for them, and they want to create a similar one. So how much do we have?
There's not a lot of great locations too around the skyline. It's like there's just shopping centers nearby, not really built.
One thing I'll also, it's related to a potential future work plan item around engaging in the implementation of the updated strategic plan. But one piece that was added to the strategic plan following the task force recommendation, so a little bit related to what you're talking about. And I know our human services, I'm going to be working with our human services team on is sort of ways to approach the epidemic of loneliness. It's something that it's in the strategic plan. And I've got some conversations already set up for January. But potentially that might be something that ends up here or for consideration, depending on where it goes. I don't know where it's going to go at this point, but could be something also that might find its way to the board around strategic plan implementation and approach. More on the inclusion side, I think, of DEI in some ways, but you know, it could be something that this group might want to weigh in on as well.
Yeah, I passed on the application you sent, and I know a few of my friends applied for it, but I'm curious to know what happened after that. Yeah.
You think I could go back to the glossary? So I was just thinking about how I see that's right now being used in high school a little bit. Like in my social studies class, we were just learning U.S. history. We were just learning about slavery, and then just, this is just an example, but what my teacher always does at the start of every unit, he makes sure to like tell us the right words to use that, so for the, using enslaved people, not slaves, and then like having that conversation, and then like I wasn't too aware of that before.
Yeah.
And then indigenous people, like all these things, all these people in American history.
Yeah.
So I think maybe if we work with the district to incorporate this more into the curriculum,
It already is.
It already is?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So we have a lot of changes that are coming to the US, so all of the social studies, but they have embedded some vocabulary in social studies and in English language arts, impact and intent, stuff like that, and what words to use. So the district is, we can embed certain those kinds of changes within curriculum rather than make them stand alone where there's no accountability and
Sure.
Yeah.
not part of an actual lesson.
Yeah.
I think that's a good conversation to have, just to learn more about how that works. Like how they would go about choosing, or like keeping the kids accountable. That kind of stuff.
So
My
one
little
thing,
teacher heart just went, oh.
I think that's a great question, but I
Yeah.
honestly think a lot of those questions need to be addressed to the school board
Right.
rather than this board, because the school board, I think that's something that is a great question to ask the school, the principals, the teachers, what they are doing to hold students accountable for comments made in class, what the administration is doing to hold teachers accountable for how they're teaching certain units, and what parents are doing or not doing in support of our students, and setting expectations, because a lot of the pushback also comes from families.
It does seem like, yeah, there's an opportunity for this group to support the youth advisory board in preparing to have those conversations, or make that advice to the school board. I think is probably where we would end up.
And I think that would be a much more appropriate way rather than going through this board, because this board and the city have really little power and
Yeah.
impact on how the school approaches all of this.
I think one opportunity I see with what you just shared though is, I think my son's in the same class at IHS, but, so he was sharing some words that were like off limits, and I was like, can you make a list of those words so they can go into the glossary? So I think it
The
can,
tools that can feed each other. for
Yeah.
sure.
yeah, so I think what you're doing at school with this class can identify more words to add into the glossary. So it could go in that direction versus us kind of trying to influence this.
And that's where the change is from. All elementary kids are using indigenous. They don't.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so as our new generations are coming, they will be more prepared than some of our old generations.
Yeah.
And so that is where the education is coming and how things are going to be shifted. I have not heard the word slavery very often, unless it's by a non-teacher or someone in a non-school setting, but in the school setting, we always use things like indigenous, the impact on all of that. So I think our schools are making that change, but we don't have any control on how to change our community.
Yeah.
And so if there's something, so that's why it's important to keep the difference, right? What is it you're asking school versus what is it you're asking the city and the community? And from what you're saying, I'm very proud of what our district has done. And so I think my question is, what else are you asking? And it sounds like you have some asks. And so how do you do those asks using and leveraging this board and the city?
Let us know.
Yeah.
Kelly's the advocacy person, right?
We're getting to sort of the end of the time.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts? Because we do have a couple of other business items, and including their closing.
Yeah, one last thought is, should we be preparing for potential concerns around the change of the administration to our existence, our work, the city, et cetera?
You should not be concerned about that at this time. The city is fully committed to supporting the ongoing equity work at the city of Issaquah. It is in our budget. It is in our strategic plan. And we are not planning to change what we're doing. Is all I will say right now.
So one thing that, so I had the privilege of getting an advanced copy of this, so I actually
Yay.
typed in some of my, so under that future potential work plan items, I added in some ideas. And so I think related to what you're saying, like, yeah, I did get the sense that we're in danger of like the equity board going away in Issaquah, but I think people are gonna start experiencing hostility.
Yes.
Perhaps, right? So that's where, I had like, recommending or supporting more inclusive pro-equity messaging to continue to make folks feel welcome and kind of double downing on that was one of the things that I was noting. And then more not the postmortem on the bomb cyclone and meeting diverse communities was something, that I'm also very interested in. And then, and then with the strategic plan, there's a whole thread in there around operationalizing equity throughout it. And so in my mind, I don't know if like as the different teams in the city start engaging with that and trying to figure out what does it mean to operationalize equity, I thought we could be a good, venue to help support that. So those were some of my quick ideas that I had jotted in here. But
The only thing I'd add to that is, on December 17th, I asked the Issaquah Nourishing Network can meet to discuss the impacts the upcoming new presidency is going to have on our immigrant population. Because we are already noticing some fear in some of our parents and students, and we're trying to anticipate and figure out how to make sure that we are showing up and supporting our families and students as they need to be to ensure that children in this community are getting the best education that they can starting in January, and that we don't see a change in the ability for students to access and feel supported at schools from January on down. And so it's a conversation I asked the Issaquah Nourishing Network to have just so that we can prepare. And I don't know when it would be appropriate if you're all collecting data in the city and trying to find out how or what impacts it's going to have to immigrants in Issaquah and what data you'll have about immigrants. So that's something I don't know, but I don't know. I just know what we're hearing.
So I know it's something the human services team is thinking about. But we haven't talked more broadly as a team.
I met with the Puget Sound ESD, the Educational School District,
Yep.
and I asked if the ESD and OSPI can talk. OSPI is the Office of the Superintendent of Public School Instruction, can address it, because I don't feel like it's fair that each school district has to address it
Totally.
when it's really a group thing. And I believe Washington State and Andrew Duckman will be completely in support of our students and our families, but we just need to verbalize it, because in the absence, like me knowing, oh, don't worry, you're safe, is not helpful. And so I'm wondering if people, different groups need to verbalize make some statements to ensure that our community is being very vocal, and then our immigrant populations know that it's going to be safe here. That, OSPI can give us, or ESD can give us some statements that we can share, that school information or school districts in general are safe, so that consistent messages are being heard, because then in the absence of that, you get these social media groups who are spreading or telling information, sharing information of one-off incidents that are happening in certain cities about ICE coming in and so forth. So, and that kind of starts building seeds of distrust in the community, right? And so how do we make sure that our community has shared with its people that it is a safe place?
Or reiterated decisions that have already been made in the past.
Yes.
This is not our first go around with this administration, so.
So then we've had other ideas start bubbling up here. How should we go from this conversation to getting ready at next month's meeting to approve a work?
There may likely be a lot of items that sit in potential and future, that don't necessarily have a firm exact place, but I'll make sure that everything we've talked about as a potential future item does make it in here. Also, a lot of what we talked about, I actually think is embedded in some of the general items, and so I'm less concerned about needing to add a ton in that future and potential. It's more like, yeah, of course, that will be part of our discussion of this. It'll be part of our work. I think that the few, just looking at also my left-handed handwriting, it's hard to read. A few things that stick out in particular as really new coming out of this conversation, or that weren't already in this draft in some capacity, is this potential collaboration with the Youth Advisory Board. I do want to add that in as something that we should be thinking about, and potentially advising on moving forward. That feels like a truly unique item that we discussed. Adding in at the community and cultural events item that's not in here yet, that should be in here, are definitely two that I think need to be added in. I think the rest of them in some way live in here. So I think some of this like learning, I'm not quite sure how to capture this, like immersing ourselves in particular areas of inequity. I think we need to get a little clearer on what that might mean. I'll put some words to that into the future potential items, so that we know what we're talking about when we're looking back at the end of Q1 and saying, okay, where do we want to fit this in? But I also see that in some ways showing up in our ongoing equity framework work. So those are some of the things that I've gotten here already, that I'll make sure that I build in as we move forward.
Okay, any last thoughts on the work plan before we move topics?
This was gonna sound kind of frivolous, I've been holding back, but the concerts in the park.
Okay, let's do it.
They're white, they're old.
Indeed.
Some musician.
I've done a little to asking around. It's like one guy they've been using who does it as a volunteer for a really long time, and he's got a base of and that's what he's doing. It means it's an equity issue because you know, a diversity issue in the sense of what you have to find is the people in the community who have those same talents, who are from different communities. That's literally the how. And we just haven't done the work.
I know nothing about concerts on the green. I know nothing about any of that.
It's just so visible.
Yes. I can do a little bit of inquiry. I'll talk to our arts team, our parks team about even, I know it used to be an arts fund grantee, but it's not anymore. And so I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah, that's why I'm bringing it up. I'm not even sure if it's funded. You guys give up a little bit. You give
we give the space, we give the green.
but it's still, it's not inclusive, right?
Yeah.
There should be more diversity in the artists.
I'll do a little digging.
Mhm.
I think that's frivolous.
I don't think
It's so
Contribute
visible.
to a welcome.
Yeah, I don't think it's frivolous at all.
Yeah.
I also think, just in general, I should remind everyone on this board. I mean, I know you also talk directly with the mayor, but like, please feel free to reach out to the city council and the mayor directly over email and share some of these thoughts. Like, this is one venue where we advise the city on things, but on things like that where the city might actually not really be it might have too much influence over it. And it might be at this point, this legacy event that we provide permits for. You know, the long change to that could be changing our permit requirement. Like, you know, there probably is a way for a more immediate change to happen with a little more direct advocacy to our city council. So remember that you are all still active members of this community who can advocate outside of the equity board for things.
Yeah.
But I'll learn a little bit.
Yeah, probably the best thing we could do is find people who know how to promote different cultures' music.
Yep. Okay. I'm gonna go first, and then you'll have I know it's out of order on the agenda. Or it's out of the order on my minutes. Who knows? January. We will not be meeting on January 1st. That is a day I hope everyone else is doing something different. Also the city facilities will be closed, so, and I have a vacation day. I'm proposing January 8th, which is the following Wednesday, and wanted to see if there were any concerns with that date or concerns with meeting quorum on that date. As a preview, we'll have three agenda items. We'll be looking at both the things that we discussed this evening with the modifications from the feedback this evening, and then we'll also be starting to discuss our equity evolution of the equity questions into a framework. So it'll be a part one of that discussion. Will be the main things on the agenda for that evening. So just so you know, it'll be a special meeting. So regardless, we won't be meeting on the first. So whatever meeting would be a special meeting. So we don't have any other business items on that evening. We just have our agenda items. But is the 8th seem like it works for folks at this table? Okay, decided. Jan 8th. Change your calendars. I will send an updated calendar invite. I know some of you love those Outlook calendar invites. Some of you live in a blessed world with no online calendar. And so just note that in your own record keeping, however you need to.
Unfortunately, I'm gonna be in India on the 8th. Is there any chance it could be on the 15th?
I will be on vacation on the 15th. Yeah, sure. Yeah. We will miss you. I hope you'll be having fun. Okay, so, and we'll, at 2 a.m. or whatever time it will be. But we'll make sure to get you caught up on everything we discuss. And please let us know in between, Karthik, if you've got any other thoughts about either of these two items. Let me know, hopefully before the 19th of December. That's when I'm gonna meet with these two to talk about our January agenda. Okay. Preeti.
Okay, closing thought. Where's my closing thought? Okay. I wanted to mix it up a little bit. And in light of Thanksgiving having been last week, wanted folks to share something that they are thankful for to wrap up this meeting. I'd like to go first.
I'll go. I am incredibly thankful for this group. It is amazing the different perspectives that come in and really remind me to think about things I hadn't been thinking about. And I just so thankful for.
Thankful for our city leadership. I mean, this cyclone made like national, worldwide headlines.
Yeah.
How we've been able to handle it. Out there, starting with Mayor Polly and all the folks that report to her and departments did just an amazing job. Very great.
I would say that I am thankful to live in such a progressive and diverse city. And to hear what Dale said about the city's commitment, irrespective of the incoming administration, there is a clear and strong commitment to equity that heartens and makes me feel a lot better about what's going to be challenging 4 years. So I'm very thankful for that.
I'm thankful for all the city crews who worked very hard to make sure that we could go back to school and have Thanksgiving with all of our family and friends.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm thankful for them too, and I'm thankful for this board, and also how like there's youth inclusivity on this board, because we definitely don't know as much as a lot of you do, but I'm glad we can work together to solve so many issues for people in Issaquah.
Thankful for fire. Got this farmhouse when the power was out.
The original heat source.
And I know Mother Nature was very cruel to Issaquah. It is hard, but in walking around for the turkey trot, I was actually thankful that it wasn't worse.
Yeah.
I mean, I literally saw probably 100 trees down, and I think 3 or 4, buildings that were damaged, which is still devastating, but the potential for it to be so much worse and so much longer. And so it's thankful that it wasn't worse, and thankful for all the crews and people who worked. And my husband went shopping several times and said people were very kind when he was shopping around. So This one really stepped up.
Yeah, ditto. Really grateful. It was such a, really grateful for my colleagues, really grateful. I think sometimes we can forget that there is such an incredible amount of expertise in our public works and parks crews. In particular, the speed that they moved at, not just to clear the trees and debris that I think all of us were dealing with, but the speed at which our utility managers moved to ensure that water was still working, that sewer was still working, that those things were secure and safe. You know, it's just so much invisible work sometimes, like we take for granted in this country, that you're going to turn your tap on and the water will come out and it will be safe to drink. And there is a lot of work that goes on behind that. And so just to see them activate how quickly they did, to see the tireless effort of our emergency manager, all of whom you've all met him, and the spirit that he kept up through the many days that he worked with very few hours of sleep. It was just a real joy to be a part of, and allowed me to still have my Thanksgiving.
One day I want to sit down and find out what needs to be there to make sure we have clean water. I never
Well,
even thought about it.
no,
but-
me neither until you
No,
said
until
it.
You said that, I was like, wait, what? That was
Yeah.
major?
I just told it. I'll have to share
Yeah.
that with you. Fascinating.
Yeah.
I think, oh, well, I mean, it's what's been said. I'm just thankful for the many layers of community that showed up for me, for each other. You know, I can't tell you like how many people reached out to see if needed a place to take shower or charge. And not only that, but the city providing those services. And so it's just very heartwarming to know that there's options, and there's, you know, some through personal connections, but also just more generally available. And so I really value having that community around us. All right, did everyone go? I lost track. Okay. All right, and with that, I adjourn this December meeting of the Equity Board at the O2 PM. Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you.